Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and I'm inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work. Well, hello, friends. Welcome to this bonus episode of Courage Becomes Her. I am so excited for us to be continuing our Summer Reads series. Today, I have with us author Michele Cushatt, and we are going to talk about her new book. So Michele is an experienced communicator, and she speaks internationally to a wide variety of audiences. She has 3 previously published books, and today we are talking about her 4th book, A Faith That Will Not Fail. Michele is a 3-time head and neck cancer survivor, and she is the parent of children from hard places, is the phrase that she uses about some of her kiddos. So Michele is an expert, a reluctant expert, in trauma, pain, and the deep human need for authentic connection and enduring faith. She and her husband, Troy, share a blended family of 6 children, including biological children, stepchildren, and foster adopt children. And they live on 8 acres outside of the Denver, Colorado area. So I cannot even begin to tell you how grateful I am for Michele. So I have known Michele for 10 or 11 years, known of her. She and I have both been in the executive coaching space. And so we've known of each other. And this conversation is the first time that we have gotten to meet and have gotten to talk with one another. And it was just such a delight to be able to finally, after so many years, connect with her and meet her. And today's conversation is absolutely incredible. So Michele opens up and talks about basically 30 years of unrelenting suffering and consistent losses in her life, and how she has not grown bitter and how she has not run from her faith. And in the book, she identifies 10 practices that help to build up your faith. And so she talks through how those practices helped her to acknowledge the pain in her life and helped her to live healthy practices and disciplines, but also recognize that those efforts don't necessarily prevent pain, but help us in our pain. She has a quote in the book that she says, something in the book she says, "A soul needs more than rule-following religiosity to withstand the crucible of human experience." And I am just so grateful for Michele and this book and all that she shares. She goes places in this conversation and in this book that are difficult, that are, maybe some cultural taboos and some things that are difficult truths for us to believe and to take in, but she does so from a spirit of love and humility, and certainly from experience of unrelenting suffering and losses and consistent pain and the struggle of wanting to build up her faith, in the midst of all of that. So I am delighted, absolutely delighted to have Michele with me today and to be able to bring this conversation to you. Michele, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about your new book. But before we launch into that, let's get to know you just a little bit. So first and foremost, where is home? And tell us a little bit about home / family, personal life.
You got it. Well, Laura, so good to be with you. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So that's a very sweet time for us to be together for this podcast episode. So I live in Colorado. And I've lived here for about 3 decades now, which I can hardly believe, but that's a long time. But I live about halfway between Denver and Colorado Springs. I'm right when the kind of foothills start to meet the highway that connects Colorado Springs and Denver. And so I live on 8 acres out in the middle of nowhere up against the mountains, which means home for me has things like mountain lions and bobcats and deer and elk. And just last night, a bear decided to tear apart our trash. While we were inside relaxing as a family, the bear was outside having a party. So, wow. Yeah, that's kind of home as far as family. I have 6 kids. Every time I say that, I have to pause and take a breath because I can hardly believe it. But 6 kids. Ages go from 31. I have 3 that are grown, 31, 29, 26, all the way down to 3 teenagers still at home, 17, 16, 16.
God bless you.
Yeah. I was telling somebody the other day that I've had teenagers in my home now for 18 years.
That's crazy. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So everybody needs to send me a spa gift certificate. That's all I'm saying.
Yes. So true. So true. Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Pleasure.
So how about an obsession? What is a current obsession of yours?
Oh, okay. So my current obsession is I've been listening to the BEMA podcast, BEMA podcast. I hardly know how to describe it other than the fact that 2 gentlemen, Brent and Marty, talk about the Bible starting at Genesis 1, but they really give us good Jewish context to kind of the genre, how it was written, what the meanings were behind different words and stories and experiences to help us modern American Christians understand the context of the Bible much more clearly. And it is blowing my mind. So, and I've been reading the Bible since I was, I could read. And so I am learning new stuff every day. And I've listened to probably 30 different episodes in the last 2-3 weeks. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Good. Well, thank you. That is definitely
fantastic.
Like one to check out. Yeah. Good. All right. What has filled your cup in the last couple of days or so?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what filled my cup today was a good old-fashioned nap. I am a big believer in naps and taking care of your body. And I took an 1.5-hour nap before we jumped on to do this podcast. And I think at this stage in my life, let's just put it this way, I am more aware of my limitations than ever before, partly because of, my age. I'm in my early 50s. But partly because of all my health challenges, and we'll talk about that more later. But I can no longer push over my limits without cost, without paying the price. And so operating in my limits means that I always need to be aware of what does my body need, and what my body needs consistently almost every day is a good old nap. So
I love that.
So I take a nap, and I always go to bed on time or early too. So sleep is filling my cup.
Oh, it's so good. So good. I think that could be a future conversation for us to have, because I think people wrestle with the idea of limitations versus laziness and like figuring out what that actually looks like. So
that actually would be a good whole entire episode, Laurel. That would be fantastic. I've wrestled with that because I'm a high achiever. Yeah. So napping seems like an 1.5-hour nap is an 1.5 hours of lost productivity. But over the last 10 years, since some of my health challenges, I've reframed that and said, but what if sleeping is actually the most productive thing you can do? So it's actually high leverage. Yeah. Because it actually then recovers your brain and your body to be more productive when you wake up or to get more done. So I think that's an important conversation, is wrestling with our limits.
Yes. Good. Well, we'll brainstorm on that for the future. Okay. All right. What is a book that has transformed your life?
So many. And those of you listening can't see what Laurel can see right now, but behind me is a bookshelf that is so pregnant with books. It looks like it could fall over right now. It's so packed. I read every day. So reading is another thing that fills my cup with sleeping. So, so I would say probably the most critical life-changing book. So the one that was really that helped in some ways to rescue me when I was really struggling was a book by Tim Keller, a pastor. He recently passed in May. And so the late Tim Keller, he wrote a book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And my story, my journey has been marked by about 30 years of significant and consecutive losses, unrelenting suffering. I'm also a person of deep faith. That's always been important to me. But those two things bumped up against each other, faith and suffering. And I didn't know if I would survive the battle between the two, real suffering with, can I trust that faith in God is real and trustworthy too? And so that book really helped me to both honor my suffering, but also still hang on to my faith, even when there was a lack of resolution, relief, or answers.
That's so good. So good. That I've read 10 or so of his books, and that is one that I have not yet read. So encouraging me to do so.
I think I read it twice, and I still have it on my shelf. And it just, for those who are really wrestling with the hard questions, it's not for the person that wants a tried answer or a cliche. It's not for them. But if you really want to wrestle and intellectually kind of do battle with some of the bigger questions of meaning and life and pain, that's a good one to look into.
That's good. Thank you so much. So we're here to talk about your newest book, A Faith That Will Not Fail, 10 Practices to Build Up Your Faith When Your World is Falling Apart. And you just said it a moment ago, but your world has consistently fallen apart for nearly the last 3 decades. True. And I've watched you through the last 10 or 11 years or so of those losses, of that pain and suffering, which, as you just said, that's only, a portion of a third of what you really have been through. But, and we'll talk about it, but everything from 3-time cancer survivor, on death's door, the loss of your own father to pancreatic cancer very, very quickly. And early on, before you and I knew one another, and I was watching you, really abandonment and leaving with a toddler baby and becoming a single mom, single parent, single woman again. And, then adopting 3 kids that have trauma and significant hard issues. So just so much. And I've seen you as a courageous woman who has been resolved to not grow bitter, has been resolved to not run from your faith, which you talk about in the book is such a, normal thing for us to do, is to want to run. But you have fought for your faith and have stood firm, even when it's made absolutely no sense. And I think probably a good starting place for us is you've been asked countless times, like, how in the world have you not thrown in the towel, given up, gone over the edge? So maybe let's start there of, how have you not just gone off the deep end?
It's such a good question. And you hear me chuckling in the background. And it's not because I'm making light of it, but it really is like, it's a miracle I'm still here, both physically, but also emotionally, spiritually. It's just nothing short of a miracle. I've had more than enough reasons to just throw in the towel. And to be honest, I had seasons where I was really close to doing exactly that. Both cancer almost took my life. I was not doing well at all, and it really was touch and go. It could have gone either way. But then emotionally, spiritually, where I was so despairing of life that I couldn't bear the thought of waking up and doing it all over again tomorrow, right? So this is such a valid question, and I'm really transparent about that because there's enough people in the world that pretend to be strong and tough and tell you to just set goals and work harder and gut it out and overcome. I want to meet people in the pit and say, I get it. I've been there. I know the kind of pain that gets you, that kind of forces you to your knees and makes you cry uncle. I get that. And I want to meet the people who are in that place that just don't have the strength or the ability to gut it out anymore. So yes, let's talk about how how am I still kind of here and still believing in a good God, even when there's so many reasons not to?
Yeah.
On one hand, I've done a really honest, hard journey of wrestling. And I think coming to the other side of these actually requires the hard questions and the doubts and the wrestling and things like that. I think as people who want to be faithful or people of faith, we think that asking hard questions is a sign of a lack of faith.
Right.
I determined to see it the other way. What if the questions actually help us build a deeper faith?
Yeah.
What are they kind of like the necessary highway to get from point A to point B? And so for me, at point A, I'm in this place of questioning and doubting whatever. If I would have just swallowed all of that and just tried to tough it out, it would have gotten the best of me.
Yeah.
Instead, I dared to tell the truth about my pain and to ask the hard questions. And what I discovered there is when we finally show up and tell the truth to God and tell him, I'm not sure you're real. I'm not sure I believe this anymore. I'm not sure why you're doing what you're doing or not doing what you should be doing. Once we decide to tell the truth, then the healing journey can begin.
Yeah. Wow. I love that so much. So good. So you have 10 practices you identify for us in there with basically 2 others that you say are foundational of prayer and scripture that you don't categorize as separate ones because you just say they're a part of everything else, which I love how you weave those into each of the other 10. But the 10 are really hard, really hard.
And very unusual, right? They're not like what you typically think.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason for that is, I grew up in a church. I grew up in a faith family. My parents became Christians when I was about 6 months old. And so even though my parents were brand new to faith, I just never known life without faith in it. Well, some of that familiarity, even though it gave me a great history and legacy of faith, at some level, it was so familiar that I didn't recognize what I had, right? And so, and sometimes when you grow up in a faith family and you go to church every Sunday, you start to believe that, hey, I'm a quote unquote good Christian girl and God owes me, right? I'm entitled to a good life. I'm entitled to God bailing me out of any trouble because I've gone to church every Sunday for my whole life, right? And that's just not how it is. And so, these practices, I had 2 criteria for these practices to include them in the book. As someone who grew up in a household of faith, the thing that I always heard in Sunday sermons and Sunday school and everything else is you just need to pray more and read the Bible more. You heard the same message. Well, your life is hard. Well, go read the Bible and pray a little bit more. Well, you're going through a hard circumstance. Okay, you need to get back and memorize scripture and pray more. And reading the Bible and prayer is important. I value both of them. But when you're in the bottom of a pit, you don't even have the strength to reach for scripture memorization or to try to be a quote unquote good Christian that, prays for 3 hours a day. You are barely surviving. And so my 2 criteria for these practices were when I was at my lowest, when I had a number of years over, different seasons where I was really struggling, what truly helped me? What kind of practices, what kinds of things truly helped me in that place that I could access, that I could grab hold of when I was in the bottom of the pit? So that was one criteria. And then the other criteria is there had to be some biblical precedent. So it had to be something that I saw modeled or heard Jesus talk about when I read the Bible, but some kind of biblical precedent. And then I put those together, and that's how I came up with these 10. So it's things like the practice of lament is the first practice I open with, which is, the practice of grieving. And so you'll hear as we go through these practices, humility, relinquishment, the practice of forgiveness, the practice of waiting, the practice of perspective. These aren't so much a list of to-dos. Okay, this is not a homework assignment. This is not a list of things that you need to work harder at. It's more about being present to what's already been done, the work that God has already done on your behalf, and resting in that. So think of them as formative, like spiritual formation practices that are more about connecting with the big work that God has already done on your behalf.
So good. So good. I love that. There is several things that I want to come back to in that. But I think before we kind of deep dive into a couple of things that you said, one of the things that I really appreciate that you said is that for you, the hardest seasons were when you were the most disciplined and you were quote unquote living out, these practices. So I love your acknowledgement that the pain still comes, that these aren't a protective shield that are going to, make the pain never happen for us. But I think that that's a hard truth to accept. So for you, like, how did you reconcile that of I'm doing all these things, I'm being faithful in these practices, but that's not making the pain go away or, prevent the pain?
Behind that, part of my reconciliation of that is I had to come to terms with the fact that although I talked about saved by faith through grace, I lived as if I was saved by works and performance, right? And so even though I understood the gospel to be God, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I've heard those verses, all of that. I was still acting like and operating as if I did enough things, if I checked enough Christian boxes, that I would be able to fix this problem that was going on. And the truth is that I hadn't yet reconciled or reckoned with my status as a broken, sinful, irreparable human being that needs rescue, right? Yeah. And that sounds so contrary to our American mindset of that, you have everything you need in you and you can be all that you can be and all that kind of stuff. It's such a contrary thing, but to kind of come to a place where I admitted my best efforts weren't enough were exactly the best place to be for me to start to heal, to finally come to the end of myself. AA will call it rock bottom or, whatever, we'll call it different things. But truly, spiritually, we have to come to a place that say no amount of prayer is going to save me. Only Jesus can do that. No amount of Bible reading is going to save me. Only Jesus can do that. No amount of church attendance or, whatever, or service or volunteerism. And so that was part of that reconciling, is seeing that I had kind of, I had allowed myself to believe that I could achieve my own righteousness and holiness. And it's just not true.
Yeah. So you're 100% right. And I love how much you go into this in the book of so many of us have bought into that. Like we're such a performance-oriented culture, such a transactional culture. And I think, and Tim Keller talks a lot about this as well. Like, I really think that, and I think you do as well, but I don't want to assume that that is one of the foundational issues that is creating so many of these other problems that we're seeing today, is that we have convinced ourselves that it is about our goodness and our effort and our achievement. So talk a little bit more about, for those of us who, are still in that place or wrestling with that, like, how did you reframe that, rethink that, get to that place of like the aha moment, if you will?
At some level, we have to get sick enough that we want to do something different.
Yeah.
Right. We have to realize it's not working. I think of a person in the New Testament that was ill. I can't remember the exact story, but I think it was the man that had been paralyzed since birth, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But Jesus looks at him and says, "Do you want to be well?"
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like, I'm scrambling. I've spent decades of this life trying to just be good enough so I could have a good life, right? And at some point I felt, didn't audibly hear, but I felt God say to me, "Michele, do you want to be well?" And if I said yes, he goes, "And why are you doing what you do?" Let me give you a story. After I had cancer for the third time, and for those who are listening and aren't familiar with your story, I had squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue. I was diagnosed when I was 39 years old. The initial diagnosis was cancer caught early, but it kept coming back over the years that followed. The most recent time I had it, I was in my mid-40s, And it was so aggressive and advanced that they had to do a 9-hour surgery where they removed 2/3 of my tongue. That's why you hear me speaking with a speech disability. They had to remove a dozen or so lymph nodes, take out my submandibular gland, and then they had to do multiple other incisions on my neck, my arm, my leg to kind of put the pieces of me back together. Like they had to cut all this stuff out and then put me back together so I could talk and eat and swallow and drink and all of that, which, by the way, is an essential part of our functioning as a human being, right? So but after, like within a couple months of my last surgery, I started feeling sicker and sicker and sicker. And then they found out that radiation had completely burned my thyroid and my thyroid wasn't functioning anymore. So I needed thyroid replacement. Well, for the next couple of years, it took some trial and error to get my thyroid balanced. Well, about 3 years after my most recent cancer diagnosis, I had another year where I started feeling sicker and sicker and sicker. Let me tell you, it was crazy. I was sleeping 10 hours at night, taking 2 naps during the day. My hair was falling out. I had all kinds of metabolic issues, challenges, skin issues, everything. And on top of that, pretty significant depression and just really lows, like really struggling with my mood and outlook on life. So being an achiever, I decided to tackle that by running 4 miles a day, signing up for a 5K and a 10K. I started eating only really good, healthy food. I'm a pretty healthy person, so eating lots of grains and protein and all of that. Read my Bible every day faithfully, prayed every day. I'm going to get myself together. What happened is the more that I did those things, the sicker I got, right? And this lasted for about 8 months until one day I went in for my annual physical like usual. My doctor just did lab work like usual. And on a fluke, we found out that my TSH, which is what they measure your thyroid functioning with, was 4 times the normal range. 4 times. In other words, I was sick. However, I kept doing all of these disciplines to be healthy, and the disciplines were actually making me more sick because my sick thyroid couldn't keep up, right?
Wow.
So I want you to take that illustration. It was such a powerful illustration for me because as Christians sometimes, we, rather than just sit and be with God's presence and allow his presence to bring healing and rest to our souls, we scramble trying to do Christian ministry or trying to earn our way or achieve our way to healthiness. And all it's doing is making us more sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
I think of Jesus on the cross when he said, "It is finished." In other words, it's not up to us. He did the work. We get to rest in his work. That doesn't mean we don't pray and read our Bible, but we don't do it to save our own lives. We just do it to be with him. He's already saved us. And that's the difference. We have my thyroid issue was a core metabolic problem that had to be addressed by a physician.
Wow.
Our spiritual condition is a core problem that can only be remedied by the great physician. We cannot cure ourselves.
Yeah. That's so good. Hello, friends. I'm just interrupting the conversation with Michele super quickly. Okay, this book has been transformational for me. And so I really want to encourage you to read this book, and to help encourage you to do so, I have 2 copies to give away to the Courage Becomes Her listeners. So please head over to my Instagram, Laurel Emery on Instagram, and enter to win a copy of Faith That Will Not Fail. You need this book. Please believe me on that. I also want to ask if you will please share this episode with a woman in your life. I am hearing it nonstop in my coaching conversations that so many women's worlds are falling apart right now. Consistent losses, unrelenting suffering, as Michele talked about in her own life. And I know that this conversation with Michele will be encouraging to that woman who who has really been having a hard time in life. So Please go and share this episode with that person, that woman right now, and let's get back to the conversation with Michele. I love that one of the things you do throughout the book is bring us back to that place of remembering God, remembering God's faithfulness, remembering God's goodness. There's one specific chapter where you go through kind of a little bit of a survey of the exile of the Israelites, and you show how many times God said, do not forget or remember. So I think as you're talking about this, like, to me, I appreciate so much that seems like for you that was an anchor of really helping you, to not get angry at God, although you say openly that you did, but not to have it, fall off the cliff, if you will. So talk just a little bit more about that part.
This practice of remembering God's faithfulness is critical because pain makes us myopic. So pain makes us very nearsighted. All we can see is our pain. We can't see anything outside of that. Nothing illustrates this better than my youngest daughter, who has the shortest attention span, because she can be cuddling with me on the couch in the morning. I share a story about this in the book. Sitting on the couch with me, she's 16, but she's still a girl. She wants to cuddle up and be close to mom. And she'll say something like, "You're the best mom ever." And then 2 hours later, when I tell her to clean her room or to do her homework or to put the dishes away, she loses her mind and says, "You're the worst mom ever." Right. And I'm like, just 2 hours ago, I was the best mom ever. What happened? And when I experienced that as a mom, and I've seen that with all 6 of my kids, right? I can't be too upset with them because I've done the same thing with God, right? The moment I don't get what I want, the moment things don't come according to plan, I look at him like, "What's wrong with you? You said you were a good father, and look at what you're doing." And yet so easily I forget his faithfulness yesterday or last year or 10 years ago or even 2 hours ago. And so this problem of our pain and our being angry with God is often a problem of forgetting, right? We forget. Our pain makes us blind to other evidences of his faithfulness. And so rehearsing God's activity and learning to capture his faithfulness at different seasons of our life will help us then hang on to our faith in the future when more pain comes.
Yeah, that's so good. Another one that you talk about that, man, your courage to actually say it out loud. I was just like, go girl, this is incredible. You said that mindset that we deserve it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is something that is so true.
Let's talk about that because this is so important. And honestly, I have seen this more as an American anomaly than a universal anomaly. Like you can go to some and I've been to a lot of third world countries and a lot of poverty-stricken places, and they don't have the same sense of entitlement or the same sense of injustice when they don't get what they want, right? This is very, very unique in many ways to kind of Western civilization, especially American mindset, that we think God owes us.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that he created everything, including us. Like he knit us together. We are only here because God decided that he wanted to give us life, that he gave us life, that he put us together. He made these incredible bodies that work perfectly. I mean, it's amazing that we have bodies that sustain us and keep us alive when you look at the science of it, right?
Yeah.
On top of that, he created this earth that how in the world do we have the exact perfect environment to sustain human life? Right? And seasons. And not only do we have the right environment to sustain human life, but it's also beautiful. Like it's got so much beauty, which sustaining human life didn't require beauty. Like God just decided to show off and give us beautiful things to look at while we're walking through this human experience. And then on top of that, we're like, I'm sorry, he sends Jesus, knowing that we made mistakes and we're sinful, that somehow we had to reconcile with the fact that no matter how hard we try, we still get it wrong. So he goes, I'm going to rescue you by sending my son to take, to pay the price. I'm holy. You're not. I want to be connected with you. So I'm going to make Jesus be the bridge connecting us. Okay. And after all of that, we have the nerve to look at him and say, I'm sorry, you're not doing good enough. I really wanted that big house down the street and it fell through and now I'm mad.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, I'm doing it kind of tongue in cheek because there certainly are bigger things like those who have lost a child or, those who just lost a parent to an unexpected illness or, people who have gone through school shootings or other things. Those are horrific. So there are certainly different types of grief. But at the end of the day, even if God never did another thing for us, we've already been given more than we deserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's hard to say. And that I can feel the resistance of those listening. Yeah. But if you really look at it objectively, we've already been given more than we deserve. And if we can kind of get to a place of having an accurate view of ourselves and an accurate view of God, then that puts us in the right posture to kind of wrestle with these things with the Creator himself.
Yeah. 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 I really think that's, for me, that was my biggest takeaway in reading this, is that is what it comes down to, is who is it that we think God is? And I really appreciate that throughout the book, you talk about your journey of getting to know God, like actually doing studies about his characteristics and attributes. And I think that's, that is something that there are so many misconceptions about. And we haven't really, most people have not spent time actively doing that. So I really appreciate you kind of leading us on that journey as well.
It was critical. I mean, if God is who he says he is, then this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And if he's not, and I've said this to my husband before on the hard days, I'm like, if this God thing isn't real, we are all sunk, right? And the truth is that I do believe he's real. I mean, I believe it more now than ever before. But there's no middle ground. He's not a vending machine, right? Yeah. And so we just have to, and this is where I appreciate Keller, and when he would talk about how God made you a thinking person. Think through it. Allow yourselves to intellectually wrestle with some of these questions, because when you really start wrestling with it, there's some breakthroughs that happen when you start to look at it that way and allow yourself to think. But that requires you to have the courage to push past the pain and seek truth, right? If you only want relief, if that's all you're looking for, I mean, we have no shortage of things to give us relief. Netflix, for crying out loud. Yeah. Or you can go get yourself a half gallon of ice cream and you can find relief. But if you want more than temporary relief, if you want wholeness and peace and a confidence that nothing in this life will be wasted, then you need to pursue truth. You need to chase after the truth. And that means at some point you're going to land at a place where you realize that there is a God and he's fantastic. And he's bigger than anything you've imagined. And on top of all of that, he loves you.
So good.
That's so mind-blowing, right? It puts the pain in the right perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting us journey with you through that, through your courage, and for inspiring that courage in us to want to seek that truth and to go after that. Because we all know, I mean, we feel it, those numbing and things that numb us, those distractions, they fill the void for just a moment, but it's not sustainable.
Exactly. And that's what I want for all of us, right? It's not just temporary relief of pain, even though, pain's not very comfortable. What I want is for us to realize that we have a life-giving connection with a creator who adores us and who has promised to work all things together for good, even if it doesn't make sense in this lifetime, even if we don't understand why. He also said, I will never leave you. I will never leave you. I will be with you to the very end.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So as I said, this has been inspiring courage in me so much, and so beautiful and so hard, but that it does bring that sustainable truth. That's also then brings sustainable courage, a faith that will not fail. So I appreciate that so much. So for you, who or what is inspiring courage in you as you continue this journey?
You kind of served that up for me so perfectly, because really what's inspiring courage for me is being able to have a front row seat to people like you who are also doing the work of walking out the story they've been given and trusting that the Savior will see them through. Nothing really can give us a shot of immediate strength like knowing we're not alone in our struggle, right?
Yeah.
And so even though I talk about this here, my challenges continue. Like my family, it's not like my struggle was 8 years ago. No, I mean, there are things that I'm dealing with today that are hard. And so this is not theory. This is walking it out in reality, in real time. And so when I hear from people like you or people who are listening to the podcast, or they email me or send me messages, that right there reminds me that we are doing this together, right? That we're not alone. It's what Hebrews 11 and 12 talks about, the great cloud of witnesses, that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. In other words, I'm witnessing your journey of faith, walking through your heart story. You're witnessing mine. And as we bear witness to each other, we get to cheer each other on as we trust that the Savior will bring us home. That's what's inspiring me today.
Amen. Me too. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, my friend. So good being here with you.
Thank you for being with us. And we're so glad to have you. Oh my goodness. There were so many topics that Michele and I just did not have the time to get to. So I really want to encourage you to get Michele's book, A Faith That Will Not Fail. And of course, you can enter the giveaway to win a copy of the book that Zondervan is offering to the Courage Becomes Her listeners. But you need to get it. There are multiple things in the book that were so incredibly helpful to me that we, again, didn't even get to talk about. She has all throughout the book 5-minute faith builders that are prompts and questions to really help us in the 10 practices to really help those to take root. And each and every one of those were so helpful and so meaningful to me. In particular, there were 2 that I will do again and again and again because they were just so helpful, so transformational in my journey. As you might have listened to episode 39 from the beginning of June with my husband, where we talk about just the last 2 years of our world falling apart and just the difficulties that we've been through. So definitely very helpful. I love that she talks about the radical transformation of Peter in the New Testament, of going from just his struggles with his faith and needing to build up his faith, and the Lord doing that in his life, to where he ended up becoming the leader of the first century church and the first century Christians. So please get Michele's book, A Faith That Will Not Fail, anywhere that books are sold. The link to it is in the show notes. And please connect with Michele through her website, michelecushatt.com, also linked in the show notes. She's also on Instagram and Facebook and would just love to connect with you. And she is constantly encouraging me through her social and just how she's showing up in the social media space. So thank you so much for listening to this conversation with Michele about her new book, A Faith That Will Not Fail. And I'm hopeful that we will have her back as a guest for a regular episode of Courage Becomes Her in the near future. So thanks so much for joining me. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.